Here we only have three producers in the economy, and the farmer produces coffee beans, roastery uses the coffee beans to make bags of coffee, the coffee shop uses the bags of coffee to make lattes. So we have two intermediate goods in this case, right, which are coffee beans and bags of coffee, and we have one final good, which is the latte. So first we need to fill the blanks in this table, and we can start with the easiest ones. First, we know that the farmer doesn't use any intermediate goods to produce the coffee beans. So we know that the intermediate good for farmer is going to be 0. We also have the total for rent, and we have the rent for roastery and coffee shop. So it's just a matter of subtracting 1,200 and 800 from 2,600, and that gives you 600 for farmer's rent. To fill out the rest of the blanks, you only need to keep in mind two things. First, your final value of sales is the sum of your intermediate goods, which is what you're using as a basis for your good, which typically is bought from another producer. So for the roastery, the intermediate goods that they buy would be the coffee beans produced by the farmer. And then by creating the bags of coffee, they create a new value, and that's what we call value added. And that's why the sum of intermediate goods and the value added is going to be the price of the bags of coffee, or your value of sales. Or in other words, your value added is going to be the new value that you have created through production, which is going to be the difference between the value of sales and your intermediate good that you haven't produced. Second, the money that a producer receives through selling their goods, which is the value of sales, is going to be spent in some way. Hence, the value of sales is equal to total expenditures. Well, where is that money going to be spent? It's going to be spent on buying intermediate goods for production. It's going to be spent on paying their workers wages, paying any interest payments, paying rent, and what's left over is going to be the producer's profits. Now, keeping this in mind, let's try to fill in the rest of the blanks. Now, we know that the value of sales has to equal total expenditures, which means if you look at the farmer, their value of sales is going to be 4,500. And because the farmer wasn't using any intermediate goods, all of the value of sales is actually coming from the value that the farmer created, which means the value added by the farmer is also 4,500 because they started from 0 and created coffee beans that were worth $4,500. So the new value created by the farmer is 4,500. We also know that the total expenditures of 4,500 has been distributed towards intermediate goods, wages, rent, and profits. So the rest probably went towards interest payments. So we just need to subtract 1,200, 600, and 1,100 from 4,500 to figure out the interest payment for the farmer, in which case it is 1,600. And so based on the information that we have on the interest payments, we know that the farmer paid 1,600, roastery paid 400, and the total of interest payments in this economy is 2,700. So we know that the coffee shop paid $700 in interest payments. Now let's move on to the roastery. We know that in the case of the roastery, they use intermediate goods, $4,500, which is coming from the coffee beans that the farmer sold to the roastery at $4,500. And using those coffee beans, the roastery created this new value of $3,500, which means the value of sales for the roastery is going to be the sum of the 4,500 in intermediate goods and the 3,500 in value added, which is 8,000. So now the roastery is selling the bags of coffee at $8,000, and we know that that's going to go towards the coffee shop as intermediate goods. And again, same thing, using the bags of coffee that the coffee shop bought at $8,000, they were able to produce lattes worth $13,000. So the value added, the new value created by the coffee shop, is the difference between the two, which is $5,000. Now, we can also figure out the total expenditures for the roastery and the coffee shop, because we know that the value of sales is equal to total expenditures. The value of sales from the roastery is 8,000, so the total expenditure would also be 8,000. For the coffee shop, the value of sales is 13,000, so total expenditure would be 13,000. Now we can figure out the coffee shop's wages because their total expenditure or value of sales is 13,000. They used 8,000 on buying intermediate goods, the bags of coffee from the roastery. They paid 700 in interest payments, 800 in rent, and they took profit of 1,500. So the rest probably went towards paying wages to their workers. So if you subtract 8,000, 700, 800, and 1,500 from 13,000, that's how you get the wages that the coffee shop paid. And if we do the math, we see that wages paid by the coffee shop is 2,000. We know that the total wages paid in this economy is 4,500. So the difference between 1,200, 2,000, and 4,500 is going to be the roastery's wages. So subtracting 1,200 and 2,000 from 4,500, we get 1,300 for the roastery's wages. And then we can also get the profit for the roastery by using, again, the second equation. So again, we know that the roastery's total expenditures or value of sales is 8,000. They spent 4,500 on intermediate goods, 1,300 on wages, 400 on interest payments, and 1,200 on rent. And the rest, which is left over, is going to be their profits. So again, subtracting 4,500, 1,300, 400, and 1,200 from 8,000, you get the roaster's profits, which is 600. And summing up the profits of the farmer, roastery, and the coffee shop, we get the total profit generated in this economy, which is 3,200. We can also check our math by seeing if our three methods of calculating the GDP gives us the same result. First method of calculating the GDP is looking at the sum of all the value added in this economy, which is going to be the value added created by the farmer, roastery, and the coffee shop. The second way would be to look at our spending on final goods and services. We have only one final good, which is the lattes created by the coffee shop. So just looking at the value of sales from the coffee shop, the final good would be another way of calculating the GDP. Lastly, we can also look at the total factor income. We have 4 different sources of factors of income, and in this economy, we have wages, interest payments, rent, and profit. So looking at the total of factors of income paid to this economy would be the following. So by using the first method, sum of value added, we see that the GDP is 13,000 in this economy. Using the second way of looking at final goods and services, it's also 13,000. Lastly, looking at the sum of factors of income, we have 4,500, 2,700, 2,600, and 3,200, which also sums up to 13,000. So the GDP in our economy is 13,000. And this is also another way we can check to make sure that our math is correct.